FLM, wide open thinking, world-class work, and far-reaching results. Now with locations in Minneapolis, Columbus, Indianapolis, and Washington, D.C. A strategic marketing and communications company dedicated to serving clients who specialize in the business of agriculture and the life of rural communities.
Thank you for joining us for our latest Agri-Pulse Meet the Farmhands, joined today by Lynn Tjeerdsma from the office of Senator John Thune. Lynn, thanks for taking the time to join us.
Absolutely. Always happy to talk about agriculture, and especially with Agri-Pulse.
Very good. Well, for starters, can we talk a little bit about you instead of agriculture? Can we just hear a little bit about the timeline of your career, as far back as you'd like to go, all the way up until the present?
Sure. Well, for me, it goes back quite a few years. I started farming in 1972 in South Dakota, and operated about a 1,700 acre livestock. I had beef cattle, hogs, and diversified crop operation. Did that for about 15 years, and for some reason decided there must be something a little different over the horizon, and had a chat with our county executive director. Back then it was ASCS, and she said, well, you should try for one of these jobs. So I sent in the application and was fortunate enough to get selected to go through the county operations trainee training. And as a result, I spent 4 years at the Moody County FSA office in Flanders, South Dakota as the county executive director, and went from there to working for Senator Larry Pressler as Ag LA for the 1990 Farm Bill. And my plan when going to work for him was to see him through the election, or his re-election in 1990, and the Farm Bill, which both occurred. And in 1991, I started working as a program specialist at USDA Farm Service Agency. And I spent quite a few years there, from specialist to branch chief, and then I went through the senior executive service training, and spent a couple years after that at the Theodore Roosevelt Conservation Partnership. Was going to go back to USDA. Got a call from Senator John Thune's office asking if I'd be interested in working for Senator Thune on the 2008 Farm Bill, which since I'd had previous Hill experience, I thought was a golden opportunity. So I jumped at that opportunity, got the 2008 Farm Bill passed, then went down to USDA as Assistant Deputy Administrator between farm bills, and after a couple years was asked by Senator Thune to come back and help on the next Farm Bill, which I did, and still here.
Mm-hmm. So how many, since you first came to DC then, how many farm bills would you say have your fingerprints in some form or another?
I have 5 farm bills between bookends on my file cabinet in my office, and I tell people that's my life's work in Washington. So I have 5 farm bills, 3 in the Senate and 2 at USDA.
Okay, and over the course of those 5 farm bills, how have you seen that process of what it takes to get a farm bill changed? I mean, what's similar, and what's stayed the same, and what's changed, do you think?
The process has become more difficult, and I think it's because there's less and less over the 26 years I've been in Washington. There's less of a focus on agriculture, and it's just sheer numbers. I mean, especially on the House side, and you look at, we have fewer members that actually represent rural districts. And in the Senate side, I've always been impressed with the members we've had on the Senate Ag Committee, both sides, good grounding in agriculture, maybe not farmers, ranchers themselves, but really seem to know a lot about agriculture. So that part of it hasn't really changed, but I think just the difficulty in the last Farm Bill, it was supposed to be the 2012 Farm Bill, ended up being the 2014 Farm Bill. When it comes to food policy, that's an area of contention, and I expect that to be a real challenge in the next Farm Bill. So there have been changes. Most of them, like I said, have made it much more difficult, and I expect the next one to be a very great challenge.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, it's no secret with the current election season that we're in that the political climate in Washington has differed very greatly too. I mean, what role do you think that has played? I mean, is it, I don't know if fault is the right word to use here, but is the change in Farm Bill politics, is that agriculture's fault, or is it the political climate's fault? I mean, where do you think the responsibility lies there?
I don't blame politics on any challenges in agriculture, simply because I think that's probably one area that there's the most agreement on in Washington, in the political world. I've always said there's 2 reasons I've worked on agriculture my whole career in Washington. 1, it's the only thing I know, and 2, it's the best people. And I've found in agriculture, from the members on down to staff, they're more functional than political. And of course, we all have to play the political game. That's the environment we're in. I think as far as the challenges in agriculture, it becomes more geographical differences, more geographical challenges. We've got the rice and cotton, which are totally different crops than we have in the midsection of the United States, and their needs are different. And trying to understand those needs and come up with one farm bill that serves everyone. And I realized this when I worked both as a specialist and assistant deputy administrator at USDA here in Washington, where we administered all the programs across the country. I really became aware of the differences in agriculture across the United States and how sometimes one policy doesn't fit all. So I think as farming has become more complex, trying to find a policy that provides a safety net for every crop across the country and for livestock, that's what really makes it difficult.
So in your current role, you spend a lot of time talking with groups that are looking to kind of get the ear of either you or your boss. And I'm just wondering, over the course of your tenure on Capitol Hill, maybe even going all the way back to the time in the 90s with Senator Pressler, have you seen a change in maybe who approaches you or maybe how you are approached on issues of ag policy?
I really haven't. Back in the 1990 Farm Bill, beginning 1989, I had farmers come out. Some of those farmers are still good friends of mine with the different, whether it was Farm Bureau or whether it was corn growers or wheat growers, farmers that would come out. The change I've noticed is the farmers that come out today are much better educated as far as farm policy and knowing what they want to ask for. And I credit our farm organizations with really doing a good job of educating the people they bring out and talk to the members and talk to staff. They realize they probably have 20 or 30 minutes, so it's a pretty small window to get their message across. And they do a good job, and they know what they're talking about. They give us really good ideas as far as where we need to go with the farm bill. I've always said the best ideas for a farm bill come from the farm, not from behind a desk in Washington.
Mm-hmm. You earlier joked that the 5 farm bills are your life's work. Aside from your time working to pass some farm bills, what do you think are kind of the most significant or maybe the most difficult pieces of legislation that you've helped to pass here in Washington?
I think the coal legislation, they're very controversial. There's strong support, opposition on both sides of that. It seemed like that was one issue that we really had no clear path forward that we could reach an agreement with everyone on both sides. And that's the issue with most pieces of legislation, whether it's farm bills. It seems like you can work together and find a path forward that everyone might dislike a little or dislike a lot, but they can agree on. And that one was extremely difficult, and I would say is the most difficult piece of legislation that I've worked on.
Mm-hmm. You said you first moved out here in the early 90s. I mean, was the plan to stay out here this long?
I was planning on staying out and work for the 1990 Farm Bill and to get Senator Pressler reelected. And once that happened, I decided, well, I'm going to go to USDA and see what it's like working in the national office before I go back. And I actually did leave Washington once. That was in 1993. My wife had been working for Secretary Madigan. She was a staff assistant for Bill O'Connor. She's spent most of her career in Washington at USDA. And we decided we wanted to get back to our roots. She's from South Dakota also. So I tried to find an office in South Dakota that was open. There were none, but I ended up in Cass County, Nebraska, which is just south of Omaha, and ended up being CED there from 1993 to 1995. Well, then I decided I needed to work on one more farm bill, so I came back to Washington to work on the 95, which ended up being the 96 farm bill. And then I decided, I guess I better stay in Washington and finish out my career here.
And 20 years later, you're still doing it.
That's right.
Fair enough. And in talking with some Hill staffers, it seems like in their initial move to Washington, there was one big policy or one big issue that really kind of drove them to, dive into a career on Capitol Hill. What was that one big issue for you? I mean, I know you talked quite a bit about the farm bills that you've helped to pass, but what specifically in those farm bills? That's a huge piece of legislation. What specifically in there was the driving force for you?
I've specifically enjoyed working on the commodity programs when I was at USDA after the 96 farm bill, or during the 96 farm bill. I was responsible for drafting the regulations, the PFC, production flexibility contract regulations. So commodity titles, to me, it covers just about most of the country as far as production agriculture, and then also the livestock disaster programs. Agriculture is #1 industry in South Dakota, and it's very diverse. We have quite large numbers of livestock west of the Missouri River, and production corn, soybeans, mostly in the eastern part of the state. So we have a nice mix, and I've just had a passion for helping. I decided if I'm not going to be on the farm myself, my career is going to be involved in seeing what I can do for agriculture.
Mm-hmm. Now you mentioned that you're not on the farm yourself, but I understand you still play a role in a farm back in South Dakota yet.
That's correct. I still have the land that my great-great-grandfather homesteaded in 1883. That's where I grew up. I recently renovated a farmhouse that was built in 1903 by my great-great-grandfather. Go back there. I leased the farm out on shares and to play an active role in managing the farm and marketing my own grain and the inputs, and it's been great. It really is a reality check for me, sitting behind a desk in Washington, to keep hands-on as far as what farming is still about.
Right, because I can't imagine there's a lot of, healthcare LAs, for example, that run a hospital in their free time. I mean, that's got to be helpful as you draft the policy that you're working to.
It's incredibly helpful. I mean, and agriculture has changed so much. I tell the people farming my land that I said, I'm glad you're doing it, because if I came back, I wouldn't know how to even operate the equipment anymore. A couple years ago, they had a combine parked on my yard. I got back, I figured out how to start it and raise and lower the header. The rest of it, I didn't dare touch because I didn't know what was going to happen.
And aside from keeping a hand in the farm operation there, I understand you also write a newspaper column for the paper back home?
I do. For the last 10 years, I've been writing a column for the Platte Enterprise, which is a small town newspaper where I graduated from high school. It's called What's Happening in Washington. And that too has been a really good experience for me, in that when I write it every week, it forces me to think, now what do people out away from Washington want to know about what's happening in Washington? And I've been free. I'm very privileged and blessed to have the opportunity to pretty much write what I think. It's not edited, or it's what I write down is what they publish, and it's just been a fantastic opportunity, and really helps me appreciate where I'm at. And I also have my email at the end of the column, so I get feedback, why is this, what is this, and it's just been a very, very pleasant and gratifying experience.
Mm-hmm. And I understand that back in your Platte High School days, you were quite the football player and a homecoming king as well.
Well, that's right. I was homecoming. We called him Marshall in Platte, South Dakota,
okay.
And played football all 4 years of high school, and made all conference 2 of those years.
In college as well, I understand.
And I played 1 year in college. That's correct. And a story I have to share with you, which kind of is like when you come to work in Washington. I always wanted to play football, but I went to a one-room country school all 8 years of grade school. So going into high school, I'd never played grade school, high school. I'd never played football in my life, but I knew I wanted to play. Mm-hmm. Well, we had a very demanding coach, and I didn't know what I was doing. I was assigned to be a lineman, a guard, and we were going through scrimmage. It was about the 3rd week of practice, and I was giving it my all, and everybody was, I thought. But anyway, the coach blew his whistle. He stopped everybody, and he said, "Gather around." So we gathered around. And he said, "I'm really disappointed in you." He said, "Nobody's trying, nobody's doing anything." He said, "There's one person who's really trying out here, and that's Tjeerdsma." But he said, "He does everything wrong." So that was kind of a humbling, my 10 seconds of fame. It made me realize, that you have to, and that's when you're doing something that you don't know what to do, if you at least try, you'll be recognized, and pretty soon you will learn. And I think that's the way coming up to the Hill. When I first came out here, I remember looking in the mirror in 1989 in the Hart building before I walked into Senator Pressler's office, thinking, what are you doing here? You have no clue what you're going to be doing. But thanks to the helpfulness of other staff, and I try to remember that too when I talk to younger staffers and get asked to go to coffee. This is what you can do. Try to give as much advice as possible, because I was there one time too.
Mm-hmm. And when you're out in Washington, I understand you're quite the biker, including bike, what is it, 11 miles to work almost every day?
It's about 11 and a half miles. In a couple weeks, my bicycle will turn over on 4,000 miles.
Wow.
And it's a great way to start and end the day, 52 to 55 minutes each way. From south of here, I have a beautiful ride along the bike path, along the river and the airport. So it beats sitting in a car in traffic and looking at the back end of an SUV.
Yeah. I suppose what was it that made you decide that, you know, instead of driving or instead of sitting on the metro, I'm just gonna get on a bike here?
I think it was probably my wife saying I needed more exercise, and so I'll give her the credit for that.
Had a little bit of impetus there. So aside from biking, you've mentioned your wife once or twice here. What other family is there to talk about?
Yes, my wife and I have been married for 26 years. We actually met working for Senator Pressler. She was working in the Rapid City field office. I was working out here. We both were single. Neither one were ever going to get married again. We each had a previous marriage. And the second time we met in person, we decided to get married. And that's been 26 years ago. And she spent quite a few years of her career at USDA, had done everything from working for Secretary Madigan to working at what was Farmers Home Administration. And her last job there was with being a meeting and conference planner at FSA, and she retired a few years ago, so she keeps the home fires burning while I go to work. And we have 5 kids between us. I have 3, she has 2. Her 2 are out here in this area, and I think I said she's from Rapid City, South Dakota, but we have 10 grandchildren, and my oldest granddaughter is a junior at the University of Nebraska.
Okay. And I'll wrap up with this one. If you were, you mentioned that you like to encourage people to stay, to build those relationships and to be helpful with other staffers. But if you were to go back and talk to yourself at the very beginning of your career here on Capitol Hill, what's the one piece of advice you wish you would have had that you didn't, that you now know?
I think it would be to, when you leave the Hill, my first job was working on the Hill. When you leave the Hill, you really start to appreciate the accessibility to information. There's probably no other job like working in the Senate. I've not worked in the House, but I assume it's the same there. And I think the advice to myself would be take advantage of every minute you work here, because it really is a privilege to work in the U.S. Senate or in the House, anywhere in Congress. It's a privilege to work at USDA or any other federal agency. There's something about being a public servant. You're doing something, you're giving of yourself for others. Sure, you're making a living, but appreciate the moment you have, because once that changed, I've been lucky I was able to come back to the Hill when I was all those years at USDA. I was wishing at some point I could. I had that opportunity, am still here, but there's opportunities. Learn what you can from where you're at, because collectively at the end of your career you realize how helpful all those different life experiences have been. So take as much as you can from them and learn from them.
Lynn, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. I enjoyed it.